Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our ongoing coverage of America's New War. You're looking at a shot taken from New Jersey this morning, looking towards the east and the bottom tip of Manhattan this morning. Smoke continuing to rise from ground zero. Welcome back. I'm Paula Zahn reporting this morning from New York City. Bill Hemmer continues to join us. He is at Ground Zero. He will file reports all morning long. Joining me from Washington is senior White House correspondent John King. John, you'll be taking a number of questions that we've asked people to email to our team here this morning. I know you're ready. Also in Atlanta, at our investigation desk, Miles O'Brien. Wanted to quickly bring you up to date on some of the headlines this morning that I'd love to share with you. What I can tell you in New York City, as we look at some of the folks, pictures of rescuers digging through the rubble, for the first time since the 1800s, since 1883, there will be ferry service from one of the boroughs of New York City, Brooklyn, carrying workers into Manhattan. That is because the Brooklyn Bridge is closed and the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel is closed. It is going to be a mess here tomorrow morning, as even though most of the subways are up and running tomorrow, a lot of folks who are going back to work to Monday have not been at their offices since Tuesday, and not all the arteries heading south are open at this hour, so they're going to find difficulty dealing with all this uncertainty. We're going to come back to the broader headlines in just a moment, but I'd like to catch up with Miles, who's standing by at the investigation desk. Miles?
Paulo, just for the latest on America's New War, there has been a second arrest in connection with Tuesday's attacks. Details are pretty sketchy about this, but the Justice Department says the man was wanted as a material witness in all of this. This is the second material witness arrest that we've had to report to you. Pakistan. Significant development here. Pakistan will ask Afghanistan's ruling party to hand over suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden, the prime suspect in all of this, or face the possibility of military action. The head of Pakistan's intelligence agency is expected to take the message to the Taliban, the leaders of Afghanistan, within the next 24 hours. And moving a little closer to home, the U.S. stock markets closed since Tuesday's attacks, will reopen tomorrow morning. The longest shutdown since World War I. The New York Stock Exchange will open with 2 minutes of silence in memory of those who died in the attacks. Now, we know you have questions and comments about the attacks and the potential U.S. response to them. We invite you to send them to us. The address is attack@cnn.com. Our reporters and our experts and everybody we have stationed all around the world will attempt to answer your questions just ahead. So send those in now. Attack@cnn.com. Paula.
And I know, Miles, you're going to take a stab at a lot of those. Look forward to talking to you in a little bit. Earlier this morning, we were on live with Tom Mateer, who has been reporting from Islamabad, Pakistan, talking a little bit about what the reaction is to the Pakistani leadership saying they will send a delegation to Afghanistan tomorrow to demand that the ruling party there, the Taliban, releases Osama bin Laden to them. Right now, I want to go to a report that Tom Mateer just filed just minutes ago with an even more up-to-date perspective.
Sources tell CNN that President Musharraf will indeed send a representative into Kandahar, into Afghanistan, to meet with Mullah Omar tomorrow, and they will provide an ultimatum to the Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden in 3 days or face a huge military operation. We also have been getting some more details about the phone conversation last night between the Pakistani president and U.S. President George W. Bush. What the Pakistanis want for the cooperation in any military operation would be U.S. efforts to relieve the economic suffering here in Pakistan. The U.S. has sanctions in place here, also restructuring the debt of $30 billion here in Pakistan. They also are asking the United States to help Pakistan in its dispute with India over the Kashmir region, that disputed region, asking the United States to play a more active role. And they've also asked that India and Israel not be involved in the operation to get Osama bin Laden, if indeed he is the one they go after, if there is indeed a military operation. Also, they do say that Osama bin Laden, they say holds the key to war or no war in this region. Now, it is a bit unsettling right now what's going on behind the scenes. There is a briefing going on all day long. The Pakistani president has been meeting with editorial writers, scholars, and even religious leaders inside the president's office today to brief them on the cooperation that's going to be offered to the United States. Sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours, we expect the Pakistani president to go on national television here and explain it to the people. But there is a bit of confidence building going on right now all day in these meetings, which are expected to run late into the night, maybe up till midnight, trying to explain his government's position to his people.
Once again, that was Tom Mintier filing that report just moments ago from Islamabad, Pakistan. Right now, let's head back to Washington, where John King is standing by. John, before you get into the substance of what you're going to report, if you would put into perspective for us this morning, we know that Pakistan is one of the primary backers of the Taliban, one of 3 governments that actually recognizes its existence. How much power does Pakistan really have over the Taliban at this point with this request it's making?
Well, certainly some would argue very little, but from the U.S. side, the most important part of this development is that Pakistan is not only supporting the United States here, but publicly supporting the United States. A key distinction, perhaps not clear to all our viewers why it makes such a big distinction, but with Pakistan publicly demanding that Mr. bin Laden be turned over, that gives Mr. Bush a huge lift as he tries to build this international coalition. I spoke to a senior administration official just a bit ago who said this is very encouraging. The official went on to say the administration not in any way expecting the Taliban to comply with this request. They say it is very significant that the Pakistani government, after hedging a little bit in those early diplomatic conversations, has decided now not only, it says, to fully cooperate with the United States, but to do so in a very public way. That helps the president.
Okay, John, I thought we were going to report. There are a couple more questions to you about that. The administration saying it's not necessarily expecting the Taliban to comply. So what is it the administration is expecting?
Well, if you listen to what Tom Mintier just said, one clue in there is that if this demand is that the Taliban turn over Osama bin Laden within 3 days, certainly President Bush would not want to undermine a country that is trying to help the United States. So if the United States views this as a serious diplomatic effort by the Pakistani government, perhaps we can read into that we would not see any at least large-scale military operations for at least those 3 days while this was going back and forth. Also helps the administration. We are told by senior officials the president is directly and sternly pressuring the government of Saudi Arabia to break diplomatic ties with the Taliban and to crack down on wealthy Saudi businessmen who supply Mr. bin Laden with financial resources. With Pakistan stepping out in a public way, that gives the administration additional leverage against the Saudi government. Now, for more on all of this and on the president's other challenges, I'd like to bring in my colleague Major Garrett over at the White House. Major, challenge number 1 for the president, building an international coalition, preparing and narrowing down his military options. But as the stock market prepares to reopen on Monday, challenge number 2 for the president, calming the jitters of the American people, perhaps?
Indeed, John, let's take them in order. Challenge number 1, assembling that international coalition. Some positive news for the administration on Saturday. Not just Pakistan's efforts, its public efforts to support the administration generally in a military campaign, should it come to that, against Afghanistan, but now this very aggressive effort endorsed by the president of Pakistan to call for the handing over of Osama bin Laden. Other encouraging developments on Saturday. The Secretary General of the Arab League making it clear that the Arab League, in quotes, stands ready to cooperate after proper consultations from the United States on what would be the action to come. A signal from many Arab states that, in fact, it is willing to stand with the United States if it comes to a military action against Afghanistan or other potential targets on the president's list of military targets, which you so accurately point out he is currently reviewing and re-reviewing. Now, challenge number 2. Trying to get a sense to the American public that though the jitters are legitimate, the jitters are real and all the very well founded, it is time to try to move back towards some of the benchmark routines in American life. That will begin tomorrow. The New York Stock Exchange will reopen, for example. Major League Baseball will start playing baseball games again. President's due to return from Camp David to the White House. It would not at all, John, be a surprise to any of us who cover the White House and this president that he would make some remarks to try to temper the anxiety in the country and try to sort of, if you will, tee up what's going to happen tomorrow. It's a symbolically important day. It's also a important day in all sorts of realistic senses. Moving the country back to some of the routines it has seen put aside since the disastrous events on Tuesday. President probably, though we don't have any confirmation of that officially, will want to try to let the American people know that Monday's an important day and they should try best they can to return to some of those routines.
Even before this tragedy, Major, a great deal of concern within the administration, not only about the U.S. economy, but of the threat, the growing risk of a global recession. Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill will go up to New York to ring the bell to open Wall Street tomorrow morning. All this part of the administration effort to show some confidence behind the scenes. Any sense of what their fears are about the economy at this moment because of this?
Well, you know, John, nobody here wants to even acknowledge what is felt to be a sort of crass consideration about the economy. The focus is so much on all of the massive suffering in New York and in Virginia, and let us not forget in Pennsylvania where another jetliner crashed. So much of the focus of the administration is not only on ministering to those who are suffering, trying to set a tone for the country, developing a military strategy, building an international coalition, all of these manifold challenges to the president, but also, as you say, you cannot ignore, they cannot ignore, the underlying reality that this will have a profound effect on the U.S. economy. And as the U.S. economy goes, we have learned so many times, so goes the global economy, which was already teetering. The United States economy was teetering, moving closer to recession. Fact is, the administration is concerned about it, but it understands and recognizes that there's little it can do right about now to deal with the economy except to try to build that sense of confidence back in the American public that it can return to some of those important routines, and as it does so, perhaps channel some energy back into some of the fundamentals of the U.S. economy, such as consumer spending, things such as that. John?
All right, Major Garrett at the White House, thank you very much. Add one footnote myself. In conversations with senior administration officials this week, we know they have been in consultations with the major sports league asking officials to improve security at stadiums at the very same moment as the president hopes to resume some sense of normalcy with Major League Baseball beginning on Monday. Now I want to turn to Bob Franken over at the Pentagon. Bob, the president coming back to the White House today after a weekend at Camp David spent mulling his military options, meeting with his national security team. As he returns to Washington, what is the mindset over there at the Pentagon?
Well, when the national security team starts mulling, the mulling then moves to the very practical level here at the Pentagon, which of course is still trying to recover from the major hit, of course, it took. The plane crashing into the building 5 days ago, completely destroying a big section of the Pentagon. There was some video that was shot, as a matter of fact, the night before last. And as you go into the building, you see just how massive and destructive the material was. Here we're going in from the outside, what the building looks like from the outside, slowly going into the building. Then we'll go inside and you will see just clutter and debris everywhere. You will see this massive effort to try and shore up things. Here you're seeing pictures that were shot in a distant corridor showing water all over the place. Now you're seeing the many wood beams by the hundreds that have been put up, the thousands, trying to shore up an area so it would be safe to try and recover, try and find bodies. They have found now 86 bodies. They estimate that there will be 188 at all. This is just about 5 days after the plane hit. You can see just how massive the destruction was, as you might expect. And again, those wood beams are really the safety what protects the workers from collapse. That's always been such a big problem. Wherever you look, you see devastation. Those steel beams, by the way, were part of a reinforcement inside, which caused the area not to collapse immediately, and that saved any number of lives, according to people. There had just been a renovation that was going on. You can see the windows there. Those windows, in fact, stayed intact. They were blast resistant, and it's been a big effort to get the heavy machinery in, as you can see. Offices just knocked askew all over the place. So that's what the situation is inside the Pentagon. In the affected area, John, everybody has been moved from that area, of course, and in the other areas where they've been moved, there is honest planning going on. Planning, first of all, that involves the reserve call-up. 35,000 reservists are in the process of being called up. Plans are being made, specific units being identified, functions being carried out in all the various services for what's called the Homeland Defense. At the same time, other planning for the larger issue, and that is the issue of the retaliation and what the administration is calling a long-range war against terrorism. John?
Bob, as Major Garrett just noted, it can seem at times in poor taste to revisit some of the political debates that were going on in Washington prior to this catastrophe, but one of them I think is relevant. There was a debate not only between the administration and the Congress, but also at times between the military brass and the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, the generals and the admirals looking for billions of dollars in fresh money immediately. They say they didn't have enough money to buy fuels and ammunition and supplies to conduct proper training. This before this tragic event and before the military planning. Any sense of grumbling over at the Pentagon at all that we're not ready for this?
Well, not really. I mean, I think that they believe that that they are more than ready with the massive forces that they have and the specialized forces that they have, by which I mean commando units and that type of thing. But the symptomatic problems you're talking about are long-range problems in the military, problems that they've been trying to solve for a long time. And you add to that the debate over the military expenditures for the missile defense shields, that type of thing. That was all part of it. But right now I think there's a general belief here that the military is ready to do whatever it has to do. Right now they're trying to determine whatever it is it has to do.
All right, CNN's Bob Franken standing watch at the Pentagon. We thank you for that report. And for now, we go back to Paula Zahn in New York.
John, one real quick question for you. I know you cited some CNN polling that said that by and large Americans support military action against whoever was responsible for these attacks. And I know the latest poll in the New York Times, CBS News, also indicates that, that 85% back the action against those responsible. 75% still support a military engagement, even if that risks the deaths of innocent people. Now that the administration has floated the idea that ground troops, U.S. ground troops, might be deployed, is there concern there that that would in any way weaken these numbers?
There is not a concern at the outset that it would weaken these numbers, and the administration is very encouraged from the public support from key members of Congress who say, yes, look, 2 years ago the Clinton administration tried cruise missiles against the bin Laden organization. Obviously that was not successful, or certainly not as successful as that the Clinton administration would have hoped. Democrats as well as Republicans saying some ground options need to be considered here and perhaps might be likely if the president has a military strike. The issue is down the line, Paula, once those ground troops go in, if there are casualties, if there are any retaliatory terrorist acts against the United States when that happens, that will be the key test of public opinion. The administration very happy, very encouraged by the public opinion polling right now, although everyone in the administration would concede the American people quite numb right now. No one is sure any poll taken today is any great reflection of where the American people will be a week or a month from now.
All right, John, thanks so much. Right now we head to northern Afghanistan, where Dr. Abdullah Abdullah joins me this morning. He is the foreign minister of the Islamic State of Afghanistan. He is the new opposition leader, or the new leader of the opposition to the Taliban. Welcome, sir. As I understand
thank you.
As I understand it, you and your supporters have offered to help turn over Osama bin Laden and his supporters to either Pakistan or the United States. How are you going to do that?
What we have offered is our support in any operation against terrorist camps in Afghanistan, because at the moment we are already fighting against the terrorist groups in Afghanistan, and we lost one of our heroes just yesterday as a result of a terrorist attempt against him, which was connected to Osama bin Laden. So we are fighting the enemy of the world, which I mean Osama bin Laden. If the United States of America is about to show a reaction against terrorists and their collaborators, they should consult us and see what, how much effective our support in our cooperation would be.
You and your regular 15,000 or so supporters are ready to join the fight. How difficult of a task does the U.S. face, and the friendly nations that are supporting this coalition that's being put together in the region? What kind of risks do they face?
At the moment, we don't know. We don't have any idea about the characteristic of the program of the United States, and we don't know how that operation would be launched. I think if there is a serious reaction, they should consider our forces, which is already fighting against terrorists in Afghanistan and have been effective in their fightings against them. I think it wouldn't be an easy task, but it is possible to tackle this menace in Afghanistan by cooperation with the forces which are already fighting against them.
You say it will not be an easy task, and as you've made it very clear this morning, you are more experienced in dealing with Osama bin Laden and his supporters than anybody else. Why haven't you and your followers been able to get Osama bin Laden?
I think since Taliban, which had the full support of Pakistan, they control a large part of the country, and we had made calls to the international community that this problem is increasing day by day, and in Osama, Pakistan, and Taliban were given chance in time. It is 5-6 years since Osama is there, and we have been fighting against them, and they are getting stronger day by day. Terrorists from all over the world have joined them. There isn't a balance between our forces and the forces which Taliban gather, or terrorists which are joining Osama in hundreds, if not in thousands, every year.
Do you have any idea where Osama bin Laden is right now?
Since 6 days, Mullah Omar and Osama undergone secret, and we haven't been able to find out where they stay. But roughly, of course, we understand that they are in southern Afghanistan, in Kandahar province, in rural areas. This is as much as we know at this moment.
There are a lot of questions being asked about your predecessor, Masood, whether he was dead, whether he was alive. Who killed him? Or do you believe him to be dead?
Yes, he was killed by 2 Arab journalists, which they have posed, in fact, as journalists. Those journalists had gone to Pakistan before coming to Afghanistan, and they had been in the areas under Taliban control for some time, and then they were able to make an assassination attempt on 9th of September against Commander Masood, and Commander Masood passed yesterday, and he was buried today. The funeral ceremony was today, this morning, and CNN crew filmed that ceremony.
So he obviously, you think, died from injuries suffering in this suicide bombing on Saturday. Sir, what can you tell us about any movement of Afghanis for the borders in anticipation of a war? Are people trying to get out? Yes, there have been reports about the borders with the Islamic Republic of Iran as well as with Pakistan. Ordinary people, they are fear of retaliation or military operation. They try to leave Afghanistan en masse. Of course, there should be a clear differentiation or distinction between the ordinary people of Afghanistan, which are against the Taliban and against the terrorist groups in Afghanistan, and the Taliban leadership. The Taliban leadership, they are trying to hide out these days. We received reports since yesterday that in the front lines, which we are facing with the Taliban and with the terrorist groups, the Arabs and Pakistanis are moving away from the front line, or they are evacuating the front lines. While a few days ago there were reports that the leadership of the Taliban, they had gone to the front lines to get away from the centers, which might be the targets of a retaliation operation by the United States. I think somehow they might have seen no action. Now they have gone back to their business, the Taliban leadership, except Mullah Omar, which is in hiding still. All right. What do you expect tomorrow when a high-level Pakistani delegation descends on Afghanistan and demands that the Taliban turn over Osama bin Laden?
Pakistanis are not supposed to demand the Taliban to turn over Osama. What Pakistanis has to do to cut off support to the Taliban and to halt the recognition of the Taliban government as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. Pakistan, is, as you know, is one of the 3 countries which they recognize Taliban as the official government. And the other thing which they can do is to stop supplying Taliban with arms and ammunition. This will diminish Taliban's capacity in launching war in controlling the areas of Afghanistan, while Pakistanis have been trying to deny their support for the Taliban and their influence to the Taliban. If they don't have influence over the Taliban, then it is even worse. They have created a group and continue to support them, while from the other side they claim that they don't have an influence over them. I think this is just an act of getting some more time. If Pakistan succeeds to get time and waste resources, I think it will be a failed operation right from the beginning.
All right, so you sound pretty skeptical of what Pakistan is offering at the moment, but in exchange for its cooperation, what Pakistan wants from the United States is retiring some $30 billion of debt. It wants Pakistan to get involved with the Kashmir dispute with India. Do you believe that if the U.S. follows through with some of those requests, that in fact some of those things that you'd like to see stopped, like the transporting and the supplying of weapons across the border, will stop?
Pakistan will not be able to give that debt to refund that anyway. And from the other side, the Kashmir problem is not something with the United States. It is with India, and it is a dispute which has to be solved between India and Pakistan. Yes, I am skeptical of the Pakistanis' stand, because if they still say that they don't have influence and they have to send delegation, I think it is the same circle, the same vicious circle which the international community has gone through in the past years. When Pakistan was asked to call Taliban not to destroy Buddha statues some times ago, they said that they will send a delegation to the Taliban, while this didn't help. These things have happened in the past, and this is the basis for our skepticism when we heard that Pakistan is trying the same methods once again in a very serious affair.
All right, Abdullah, thank you very much for your perspective this morning. The Foreign Minister of the Islamic State of Afghanistan, the new leader who replaced Massoud, who is represents the opposition to the Taliban. Thank you, joining us this morning by video phone. Back here in New York, the gruesome task of digging through the rubble continues. I want to check in with Bill Hemmer, who joins us from close to ground zero. I think, Bill, we haven't had a chance to mention this enough this morning, but the mayor of New York City continuing to call this a rescue operation until all hope has expired. That's significant, isn't it?
It is, especially for those who are still holding out the possibility that, again, some people may be pulled out of the rubble behind us here. It has been 5 days, though.
Perfect timing.
Going back to last Wednesday, since any survivors were pulled out of the former World Trade Center here in Lower Manhattan. The fire commissioner, Paula, gave us a pretty good description, though, of what he felt was happening. He said, you know, it's one thing to see the rubble above ground, but what we're not seeing, he says, is a volcano-like shape that goes about 7 stories below ground, to give you an indication of how much structure came crashing down on Tuesday morning of last week. Also, Paula, we're seeing the smoke that continues to come out here. In addition to that, we're seeing a lot of steam. We're told that the steel that in many cases had heated to well over 1,000 degrees on Tuesday is still hot at this point, and the water hoses that continue to treat that steel, that's what's emitting a lot of that the steam that we're seeing. In fact, NASA released an image over the weekend that we can see clearly from space, that trail of steam that extends for the southern end, the southern tip of Manhattan Island. In fact, when we flew up the other day here in New York, coming in at a low altitude over New Jersey, we could see from 40 miles away, it was the tallest thing on the horizon. Again, that steam trail and smoke trail that leads out into the sky from the former World Trade Center. You know, the numbers are staggering, close to 5,000 still missing at this point, including 300 firefighters. And yesterday here in Manhattan, the fire chaplain had his funeral service held here, and there was one person in attendance who refused to miss that service. CNN's Richard Blystone and his story.
Surgery is going to keep news photographer David Handschuh away from some friends' funerals. But this one he wasn't going to miss, because in the line of duty he saw a lot of Father Mike Judge, the firefighters' chaplain, who was killed Tuesday while giving last rites to a fireman.
He would hold your hand and you would just feel good. He emanated some form of just positive goodwill that nobody else I've ever met could. By just touching you, by putting his hand on you and giving you a hug, you just floated away happy.
Many of those in the overflow crowd had narrow escapes that day. David Hanshew had 2.
You hear the sound and then the building starts falling down in slow motion. And I'm a photographer. The initial reaction was to raise the camera and take a picture, but something up here said, just run. And in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, I've never once run from anything. But it probably saved my life. The wall of debris that came flying down just picked me up and threw me a block.
One leg shattered, the other torn up. Firemen pulled him to a delicatessen. Another photographer captured that moment, but it wasn't over.
When the second building collapsed, the facade of that building was blown in. We were trapped once again. Using their hands and tools and sheer strength and will, they pushed their way out.
For news photographers, cameramen, reporters, days like that are part of an unwritten contract with life. So too with soldiers, policemen, firemen, which doesn't make it much easier. But the thousands still missing downtown, they didn't sign up for this.
I'm so sorry that so many people lost their lives over this. It's not comprehensible. It's not right.
At the end, the photographer pulled out his camera. It may not make much of a picture, but this one's personal. Richard Blystone, CNN, New York.
Richard, thank you. And so many hundreds and possibly even thousands of firefighters from across the country descended on Manhattan to help in the rescue operation. Aileen Pepe is one of them. She's a volunteer firefighter from Keene, New York, upstate New York, near Lake Placid. And when we talk about the missing firefighters, what does it say to you, Aileen, about the job you do and about the job you've come to do here in Manhattan?
How dangerous it really can be and is, and how quickly, it was a very sudden thing that happened to all of them at one time. It wasn't one fireman here, one fireman there. It was 300 instantly. I think that's the first time I've ever heard of something like that happening.
You were at the Pentagon before coming up to New York yesterday. What can you do here and the others who are doing similar jobs?
Whatever we're needed to do. The Pentagon, I answered phones and just helped coordinate volunteers, and here I just moved some debris and supplies and things like that. I wanted to come and rescue people. I'm trained as an EMT, and I was prepared to save lives, and it's pretty depressing to realize that there is nobody there for me to tend to.
How do you feel being here, knowing what you just said? It is really a dramatic statement.
It is. It's, I grew up here. I grew up in Washington Heights, and
wow.
You come through and you see all the firemen walking, exhausted, and the National Guard, and all the police, and you see that plume of smoke, and it just doesn't seem real. But I don't know what Bin Laden, they may have known the landscape of New York, but they don't know New York. I mean, I just kind of feel like everybody's looking, hey, Bin Laden, you're talking to me, this is New York. You don't know what you're dealing with, who you're dealing with here. This is not, I mean, it's a horrid loss of life, but this is not going to look New York. I mean, no way, no way.
You going back in today?
I believe so. I believe so. Take a little break, and yeah, I hope.
I know you were hesitant to come on today, but it is appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And, our best to you and everyone else who's involved in the operation.
Thank you.
Aileen Pepe, upstate New York, near Lake Placid.
Thanks.
Again.
Bye-bye.
Paula, clearly Clearly the emotion rings true again, day 6, and again as the stories continue to trickle out. There are so many thousands and thousands of stories that we hear, and just about everybody on the streets of Manhattan has a story that is just so compelling you cannot stop. Cannot help but to stop and listen to them because, wow, they tell something that is so tragic and so heartstruck that it can overwhelm you at times. Back to you.
Well, I'll tell you this, Bill, I stand in awe of their strength.
Yeah.
We're going to quickly head back to Atlanta right now where Miles has an update with some new facts for us.
Quick recap for you, Paula. The latest at this moment. The massive search for culprits in this attack has netted a second arrest. Justice officials say a material witness is in custody in New York. He had been among the 25 detainees held by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, now being held by the FBI, facing a material witness warrant. Also, U.S. intelligence is saying it has photographic evidence that links Osama bin Laden to the assault. The images reportedly show a meeting between a hijacker from American Airlines Flight 77, the 757 that flew into the Pentagon, and a suspect in the attack on the USS Cole. You recall that attack was linked to Osama bin Laden's organization. So there you have a link between the USS Cole and this latest attack, the attack on the World Trade Centers in the Pentagon. CNN has learned that within the next 24 hours, Pakistan will ask Afghanistan to turn over Osama bin Laden. A significant development there. Pakistan closely allied with Osama bin Laden over the years. Pakistan saying they will face massive military action otherwise. And investors here in the U.S. and around the world are bracing for a volatile first day of stock trading since Tuesday's attacks. The markets will reopen tomorrow morning, the longest closure since World War I. We can find in-depth coverage of these stories and more at CNN.com. And we also invite you to send us email, questions, comments, anything on your mind this morning. Send it to us at attack@cnn.com, and we'll get to those questions and comments a little bit later. Paula.
Okay, thank you, Miles. On this Sunday, a Sunday that is a day of worship for many Americans across the country, there is a lot of reflection about what happened to our country starting at 8:45 last Tuesday morning. Right now I'm going to check in with Reverend Peter Duganzik, who is the associate pastor of St. Mary's Church. He serves for the Reverend for a parish that is in Manhasset, New York. That is a suburb just about a half hour away from New York City. Good morning. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good morning, Paula. I'd just like to take a moment, too, to thank the people of America, because this community, as you know, has been hit. Many of our members were either working that day, many of our members were in the city, have friends, or were lost. And we believe that the prayers of our great country have been prayers that have helped us through this week.
You just mentioned that some survived from your parish, some are lost. How many people are missing in your parish?
From our parish directly, I believe about 10, but the community itself could be as high as 30 to 35.
And how many people survived of those workers you talked about that worked in the city and that were there that day of the multiple attacks?
I don't even know if I could put a number on it. There are so many that worked in that area, so many that worked in the district, that it would be hard to put a number on those. I've talked to so many who were there that morning, who saw it happen from across the street. It's just been devastating to them.
Have you had any confirmation of deaths, not only at your parish, but in the surrounding community?
None direct. Nobody that we have known has been identified, and so we still hold hope for many of them. We still hold hope that these efforts will yield some miracle somewhere.
What is the message that you will deliver to your parishioners today?
I'm glad you asked that question. Today's gospel is the gospel of the prodigal son, the son who returns to his father, the son whom the father declares as once lost but now found. And the message is going to be a message of hope. The hope that, yes, we have those who are missing and we pray that they will return, but also that message, too, that God does love us. He welcomes us back. God will embrace us in these hours, just as he embraced this lost son. And so that it's God who will ultimately give us, I believe, consolation in all of this.
I think you would have to acknowledge, even though many Americans have great faith, no matter what religion they follow, their faith has certainly been sorely tested this week. Reverend Billy Graham, in a poignant sermon during the National Day of Prayer at the National Cathedral earlier this week, basically told folks who believe that it is okay to be mad at your God. Are you mad at your God?
I don't know if I would use the word mad. I don't know if I would use the word angry, but I am certainly frustrated. I am certainly, and I would say to anyone who comes to me, anybody who would be willing to come in and talk, that same thing. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to project those emotions to God. It's okay to say to God, this hurts, I'm angry, I'm mad. And I have done that, and I do that in my prayer.
I know that St. Mary's has an elementary and a high school that is a part of your community. Reverend Billy Graham also said that it is okay to question why a God would allow such an evil thing to happen. What do you say to children that you come into contact, or what should parents say to their children when their child asks, how could a loving God do this?
And in fact, I have been asked that question by many of the children in several opportunities that I've had to talk with them. And I believe the answer is very simple. It's God is crying with us. God is frustrated with us. The free will that he's given humanity is also a free will that can be abused. And in this case, it is contrary to God's will. An act like this is not in God's plan, but he will help us to rise from this devastation, to love one another once again, and to overcome the pain that we feel through the promises that he gives, the promises of eternal life, the promises of seeing our loved ones again.
What can your parish expect later this week?
We can expect more names to be identified, more of those who are missing. We will be saying prayers throughout the week. We have added additional services for opportunities to pray. We have also added a few services for families who are grieving at the time, families whose loved ones are still missing. And hopefully through all of that, they will be able to see a community of love and a nation that will support them and support our government and our people in this effort as we rise from these ashes.
Reverend Peter Duganczyk, I know this is an extremely painful time for you and your community, and we appreciate your taking out the time to share some of your thoughts with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula.
We have talked a lot about what has happened in New York City. Not much has been said about the plane that went down in Pennsylvania, but right now, Frank Sesno takes a look at what has happened in the wake of the plane that crashed into the Pentagon, and a reflection on those who perished.
Lost on American Flight 77 from Dulles, bound for Los Angeles. Paul Ambrose. Engaged only 1 week, he was planning to marry his girlfriend in Spain next fall. A doctor with a master's degree in public health, Paul was working with the Surgeon General to address racial disparities in health care. He was not behind the controls that day, but Wilson Bud Flagg was a pilot for American Airlines. He was traveling with his wife Darlene and their friend Barbara Edwards, who taught French and German at a Las Vegas high school. Stephen Jake Jacoby was COO of a paging company, MetroCall, on his way to a conference in California. His colleagues say the fact that his company's service continued during Tuesday's tragedy is a tribute to Jake's hard work. Chandler Keller was an engineer at Boeing and what his wife of 1 year calls a real Renaissance man. She says Chandler cooked, surfed, skied, camped, and could do just about anything. Michelle Heidenberger was another American Airlines employee. For 25 years, she served as a flight attendant. She's survived by her husband, a pilot for U.S. Air, and their 2 children. Michelle's family says she died trying to protect her passengers and her crew. American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon around 9:40 a.m. Eastern Time on September 11th, 2001.
Right now, we are going to change our focus, moving from that wealth of human emotion to what is happening politically. Joining me right now is Omar Samad. He is the executive director of the Afghan Information Center. Do I have that title correct, sir?
You have it correct, Paula.
Okay. First of all, your reaction to the fact that a senior Pakistani delegation will head to Afghanistan tomorrow to demand that the Taliban hand over Osama bin Laden.
Well, as you just heard a few minutes ago in your interview with Dr. Abdullah in the northern parts of Afghanistan and the forces who are fighting against the terrorists and the Taliban, that there's a lot of skepticism about the Pakistani efforts to bring about this kind of arrest of bin Laden from the Taliban. From past experience, Afghans have known that they cannot really trust the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis have been intimately involved in Afghan affairs, in the creation of the Taliban, in supporting the Taliban, and that whole network that constitutes bin Laden and his terrorists. Now, we're not saying that all of Pakistan's government is involved, but there are major parts of that establishment that have been guilty of supporting them. So let's hope that the Pakistanis have realized finally that they need to be on the right side of this issue, and that they will have to make some very hard changes in their policies and and come together with the international community in order to get rid of the world of this menace.
Well, it sounds to me you have the same degree of skepticism that Dr. Abdullah has. He basically said that what he thinks the Pakistanis are doing right now is getting more time.
Again, we do have skepticism, but I think that Afghans have a reason for that. As you know, most of Afghanistan is in mourning today because of the loss of their great resistance leader, Ahmad Shah Massoud. And Pakistan had been fighting against Massoud for a long time. Massoud had been warning the world and the United States that Afghanistan and the Taliban and the bin Laden network that is rooted there can be a big threat to the rest of us. And he was proven right, unfortunately, last week with what happened in New York and Washington.
All right, you say that Afghanistan has a reason not to trust Pakistan. What kind of an influence does then Pakistan have over the Taliban? It after all, is one of 3 governments that recognizes the Taliban as the ruling party of Afghanistan.
Well, let's say that Afghans do not trust the Pakistanis. Afghanistan, unfortunately, most of Afghanistan is ruled by the Taliban today. There's a part that's fighting against them. Now, as far as Pakistani support and recognition of the Taliban is concerned, it's something that has existed since 1996. And we all know that the Taliban could not have lasted without this Pakistani logistics and arms and manpower assistance. And we have been talking about this, the Afghans have been talking about this for a long time. Let's hope that now there will be a breakthrough, a change in Pakistani policy, and that the change would be real, and that it will benefit the people of Afghanistan, because it's not the people of Afghanistan who are the enemy. It is basically the terrorists who have taken over in that country and their association with the Taliban. So if we can get rid of this menace, I think Afghanistan would be at peace, and maybe Pakistan itself will also save its own neck from this threat that exists.
But specifically, what kind of breakthrough are you referring to? What are you hoping for?
I think that unfortunately we will have a military attempt on the part of the United States and others in order to eradicate the terrorist networks. The breakthrough will happen on the field militarily, and it has to also happen politically. So the change and the shift of policy with Pakistan, which has to be proven to be real. Again, it is not proven to be real yet, but we'll find out within the next 48 hours probably, will have to come on a military basis and on a political basis. The resistance that exists in Afghanistan today has to be helped, needs to get support in order to assist the international effort against the terrorist networks. There are no other options. Those people on the ground, the Afghans who have been fighting against the Taliban and the bin Laden network, know the terrain, know the people, know the enemy, and know how to go about doing the job. And I guess what they will need is assistance from the United States and others, militarily and otherwise, in order to accomplish this job in a clean manner without hurting the Afghan people, who are themselves victims of this major threat that exists.
Mr. Samad, what is it then that you expect to happen when this Pakistani delegation arrives in Afghanistan tomorrow?
Again, if we were to be optimistic, we hope that they will be able to get assurances and practically show that they are able to get bin Laden out. But unfortunately, it's not just bin Laden. We're talking about a very vast network. There may be other bin Ladens in the pipeline. That's why you need to go to the root of the problem. You need to wipe out the infrastructure, the facilities, and as many of the networks that exist, whether they're financial networks or military networks, logistic networks that exist that support this terrorist activity based in Afghanistan. And it's not just Afghanistan. I mean, they have a lot of support within certain extremist groups in Pakistan, within certain extremist groups in the Arab and Islamic world.
One last question for you, sir. Tom Mintier checked in earlier this morning from Islamabad, Pakistan, and he reported there is a steady outflow of Afghanis towards the Pakistani border, and he said the expectation there is, now that the United States has declared war, that hundreds of thousands of folks are expected to flood to the borders. What do you think is going to happen?
This is such a tragedy. The Afghans who have suffered so much under the Taliban rule, millions are uprooted, displaced, and now you will witness probably hundreds of thousands or millions more Afghans being displaced. This shows that the Afghans are not supporting the Taliban. The Taliban, as you know, have called for a holy war against their enemies and anybody who supports the international effort against the Taliban and bin Laden. So you have to separate the Afghan people from the terrorists. And this shows, as you just said, that the Afghans are leaving. This is their way of voting against the Taliban. They're fearful for obvious reasons, but at the same time, what needs to happen is that the people of Afghanistan needs to be supported from a humanitarian point of view, and that assistance needs to be rendered in order to accommodate these refugees who are fleeing the Taliban tyranny and oppression.
Omar Samad, thank you very much for your insights this morning. Good of you to join us. Just a quick programming note for you all this morning. At noon on Late Edition, Secretary of State Colin Powell will be a guest. You heard a little bit of what the Secretary of State had to say yesterday when he gathered with President Bush and the rest of the members of the cabinet. So that will be well worth watching for an update. Right now, I wanted to bring together my colleagues on television for a roundtable to try to answer some of the smart questions you have posed of all of us here. Joining us again right now is Bill Hemmer, near Ground Zero. John King, Chief White House correspondent, of course, with the commanding view of the Capitol there this morning, and Miles O'Brien from Atlanta. Okay, our first question comes from John Larson, and it is, what made the World Trade Center a desirable target for terrorists? John, you want to go first?
Well, government officials believe simply that it is a monument to capitalism, if you will, that these terrorists targeted the United States government, hitting the Pentagon. They believe the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania was targeting either the U.S. Capitol or the White House. So two targets, major government installations to deflate the will of the American people, if you will, about their government. Then you go to downtown Manhattan. It is a monument to capitalism, the World Trade System, a shot at the American psyche, if you will.
All right. Next question comes from Seth Araman. It is, if the Taliban does decide to give Osama bin Laden up, would this mean that the United States would not seek military action against Afghanistan in other terrorist organizations? Bill, you want to take a crack at this? Or Miles?
Yeah. Based on what I'm hearing, and again, I'm on the streets of Manhattan, but it appears at this point that the White House has made up its mind. They're already talking about that three-letter word, war, and it appears at this point that it will be a long engagement. You know, we had a guest on the past hour, Paula, who indicated this could go on for 8 years until everyone that the U.S. and its allies believe is responsible will be found and rooted out. The president mentioned smoking them out of their holes yesterday. Quite a description given by the president for how the operation may entail. But clearly you have people in various countries, in many parts of the world, including our own country, where here in the U.S., where a number of suspected terrorists may still be possibly planning possible hits. So perhaps the Pentagon could give us a better indication of military action on this. But I think for anyone who's watching, I think in terms of engagement on a military sense, it could be a long process.
All right, John, I can see you want to add a little more to that. Have you heard anybody talk about that possibility? I know I've had so many guests that are very skeptical that the Pakistanis' request will be met with any sort of cooperation. But let's say, for example, the Taliban turns him over. Who would you be going to the war against?
Against his organization. The question would be, would the focus then turn more to financial and diplomatic war, if you will, freezing accounts, trying to track money? The president, as Bill rightly noted, there's an organization out there. The president has consistently said this is not about one person. That is the message you will hear from the administration. They've asked other governments, including allied governments, places like Canada, Great Britain, France, Germany, to crack down on terrorist cells similar to the ones we have discovered in recent days existed here in the United States. And they talk about a bin Laden organization throughout Afghanistan and elsewhere in the world. So the arrest or the turning over of one person would not end this. It might put more of the emphasis on the financial and diplomatic side, but the military would still be part of the equation.
All right, Miles, you've been very patient here this morning. This next question is for you because you have been tracking a lot of this over the last several days. The question is, given the recent revelation that fighter jets were scrambled to intercept the hijacked planes headed for New York, is there any evidence that fighters were scrambled to intercept UA-93, which crashed into Pennsylvania? That one coming from Danny, I hope you get your name right here, Boseljevac.
Well, Danny, we've heard a lot of reports that there might have been an F-16 in reasonable proximity to United Airlines 93, but not close enough to have done anything. If implicit in your question is, did that fighter pilot face that awful decision of whether to bring down a civilian airliner, knowing full well it might be headed toward a significant target and causing the deaths of many other people? The Pentagon has flatly denied that. There's no indication in the wreckage of United Airlines 93 that it was brought down by a U.S. fighter. As a matter of fact, the indications are there was a struggle on board that plane that was initiated by the male passengers, and that brought the flight down. Those male passengers having cell phone conversations with their families on the plane, knowing that aircraft had already gone into the World Trade Center, might very well have seized control of the aircraft and brought it into the ground. The bottom line is, when you look at the timelines here and you look at where fighters are on this short turnaround capability, able to get in the air within 15 minutes time or so, there just simply wasn't enough time for fighters to do anything. By the time they got in the air and made their way to these aircraft, wherever they might be, it was just too late.
All right, Miles, along that note, the Washington Post is reporting that the FAA actually alerted the National Military Air Defense Command that a hijacked jet was headed toward it 12 minutes before the plane hit, but apparently no one relayed that message to the Pentagon. Now, that's what the Washington Post is reporting. Do you have any confirmation of that?
I have heard reports from other sources which have indicated that F-16s were scrambled, in fact, from Otis Air Force Base on Cape Cod and from Langley Air Force Base in the suburban Washington area. But once again, if you look at the timelines, and I've looked very closely at those radar tracking replays from the FAA radar information, the amount of time from the moment those aircraft made their sudden deviations, turned off their transponders, and started going way off their flight plans, the amount of time between the initiation of that and the impact at the World Trade Center is probably on the order of 20 minutes. It's just not enough time to have those fighter jets intervene in any way.
All right, thanks so much. We are going to move along to question number 5 here, and it comes from Julia Schneider from Key West, Florida. I guess she must be from Key West, Florida, and maybe emailed this from Germany this morning. My question for CNN is this. We were told the Vice President is in Camp David. I would like to know why we have not heard from him in person or in written statements since this tragedy struck. I must admit that his absence has struck a chord of concern. Now, John, I'd love for you to take a stab at that one, because the New York Times had a fascinating account of